Well, hi there, and welcome back to Her Shrink Ray Eye. I'm Joan Biediger, and today I want to talk about something that happens at the bench all the time, although most of us usually treat it as just part of getting a figure painted. I'm talking about the unfinished figure. Not unfinished in the ordinary hobby sense, where a jacket still needs some highlights. I mean the more difficult stage where the face and the hands, the skin, or separated parts begin to carry more attention than an unfinished sleeve or base would. Maybe the skin is blocked in just enough to look worse before it starts helping the figure. A hand might be lying beside the body because it has to be painted separately. To us, those are normal bench decisions, but they sit very close to the parts of the figure we instinctively notice first. If you paint or sculpt figures, this is completely normal. Heads on sticks, hands in clips, torsos pinned to holders. Maybe you've got limbs arranged in rows on the bench. We get used to it. We see process, not horror. We see practical choices. We know the figure is not finished, and we know why it looks the way it does. A miniature figure is a small object, but it does not behave like other small objects. An unpainted wall looks incomplete. A loose wheel or airplane wing usually reads as a part. A loose hand or an unfinished eye feels different because it belongs to the face, the body, or the gesture of a figure. That's what I want to look at more closely. Why do incomplete figures affect us differently than other unfinished miniature objects? Why does a half-painted face sometimes feel worse than primer? Why does one unfinished eye make a figure seem almost wrong, even when we know it's only a stage? I think it happens because we start responding to the figure before the paint and the sculpting and the assembly are ready to support that response. There's a stage in figure painting where the piece can look worse than it did in primer. Primer has unity, even if it's plain gray, black, or white. Everything belongs to the same state. The figure may be unfinished, but it's coherent as an object. Then the first layers go on. The skin is too flat. The shadows under the eyes are too strong. The mouth is harsh. The hands may be painted separately, so the body appears incomplete. The head may be mounted on a holder, looking less like a person and more like a little theatrical mask. Technically, you're making progress. As the painter, though, you may feel as if the figure is getting away from you. That is the peculiar part. The figure is not less complete than it was in primer. It's more complete. But now the rough areas matter more because they're on the face, the hands, the skin, or the body itself. A tilt of the head, a cheekbone catching the first highlight, a dark mark where the eye will eventually sit, the bend of a shoulder. Those details begin to pull the figure out of plain primer, but the paint is still rough. The parts may not be attached, the skin is still blocked in color, and the face has not come together yet. That is the stage where a painter can start doubting the whole thing. Of course, we know what we're looking at. We are not confused about the material, but visually, this is closer to a human figure than to an ordinary hobby material. At the bench, we know these are construction stages. Perceptually, they're harder to ignore because they appear on the face, hands, skin, and body, the places where we expect the figure to hold together. This may be one reason the ugly stage can be so discouraging, especially when you're newer to figure painting. You may think you've ruined the piece, when really you've reached the point where the figure is starting to read as human before the painting has enough layers, corrections, and small adjustments to hold it together. That's not failure, it's a normal, irritating, necessary part of painting figures. The face is usually where this reaction becomes the strongest because we don't look at faces the way we look at a sleeve or a boot or a piece of groundwork. We read faces for attention, mood, and presence and expression. Even at miniature scale, the face carries more perceptual weight than its size should allow. On a figure, a tiny change in the eyes can change the whole expression. A pupil placed a fraction too high can change the gaze. A dark outline can make the expression feel harsh. A slightly mismatched pair of eyes can make the figure look startled, unfocused, or strangely absent. The face may be only a few millimeters wide, but it does more work than almost any other part of the figure. That's why the eyes can throw the whole face off before the face is actually finished. When there are no eyes at all, the face may still read as a sculpted object. It may be blank or mask-like, but it's still clearly a sculpted surface. When one eye is painted and the other is still empty, the face becomes harder to look at. One small area has started doing the work of expression, while the rest of the face is still trying to catch up. I've had this happen while I've been painting. I'll get one eye roughly where I want it, and for a few minutes, the whole face feels worse. The eye itself is not the problem. The problem is that one small painted feature has pushed the face ahead of the rest of the figure. It's no longer just a sculpted head. It started to look like a face, but the rest of the painting has not caught up. Skin can create the same problem. A first pass of flesh tone can be surprisingly unpleasant. It may look chalky in the highlights, too red in the cheeks, too dark under the eyes, or too shiny from the first layers of paint. Shadows under the eyes, around the nose, and along the mouth can look garish before the surrounding tones soften them. A glaze intended to create warmth can look raw if the surrounding tones are not there yet. This is because skin is not just another color area. Skin carries expectations because we know what skin is supposed to look like. We know without thinking about it that living skin has variation. It shifts warmer and cooler. It has dry areas, softer areas, redder areas, darker areas, and places where the color seems to sit under the surface rather than on top of it. At miniature scale, we translate all of that into small shifts of color and value. Until those shifts begin working together, it can be hard to see the face as simply unfinished paint. This is why figure painting can feel so much more psychologically demanding than painting cloth, armor, or groundwork. A rough shirt may need just another highlight. A rough face can make you think you've ruined the figure, even when you're only halfway through the painting. There's another layer to this that has less to do with paint and more to do with how figure work actually happens. To us, the bench looks normal. To someone outside the process, it can look surprisingly anatomical. We drill ankles, we pin feet, we cut heads from casting blocks. We sand seams across cheeks, thighs, fingers, and necks. We separate hands so we can paint them cleanly. We fill gaps at shoulders, we attach limbs, we rebuild missing details. We mount tiny bodies under bright lights and work on them with scalpels and files, tweezers, putty, and fine brushes. Inside the hobby, this is the practical language of figure work. From the outside, the same bench can echo surgery, prosthetics, and anatomy. An exposed armature is a good example. For a sculptor, wire is structure. It holds the pose and supports the material. But when the figure is only partly sculpted, the armature can resemble a skeleton. A wire running through a limb, a torso half built in putty, or a head that's only roughed in can suggest the structure of a body before the surface has been built over it. The wire is not bone, obviously, but it occupies the place where the figure's structure is being built. Separated limbs work the same way. A detached arm is only an unassembled part when we think as builders. But the shape of an arm carries a different meaning than the shape of a shield or a backpack. A hand is even more charged because hands are tied to touch, gesture, labor, and action. A tiny resin hand lying beside a figure is still only resin, but it doesn't feel as neutral as a wrench. This may explain why people who do not work in the hobby can react differently than we do to progress photos or a crowded workbench. We may see organized sub-assemblies. They may see little bodies in pieces. That doesn't mean the process is morbid. Most figure work is actually very careful. There is a kind of caretaking involved. We support the figure, repair it, refine it, strengthen it, and make the parts work together. We make the face readable. We make the hands fit the figure's gesture. We make the body whole enough for the viewer to stop seeing the construction and begin seeing character. An unfinished figure lets all of that process remain visible. The parts are still separate, the seams between parts may still show, and the surface has not been resolved yet. I want to bring in the research carefully here. I'm not saying that the brain literally believes a miniature figure is a real human being. We know what we're looking at. We know it's resin, metal, plastic, clay, or putty, but we do respond to bodies and body parts differently than we respond to ordinary objects. Research on visual body perception shows that humans are highly tuned to recognize bodies, posture, faces, hands, and biological form. That makes sense. Bodies matter to us. A face or a hand can suggest attention, movement, very quickly. Even a simplified body can be enough. We can read a stick figure as a person, sense emotion from posture, and understand a gesture before we think very much about anatomy. So when a figure is unfinished, partial information still matters. A blank face, a detached hand, or an unpainted eye does not behave like a random blank area once the rest of the figure has started to resolve. A partial body can be used deliberately, but it draws a different kind of attention than an unfinished object or base. If the rest of the figure is painted and the face is left blank, that blankness feels intentional. It may read as a mask, anonymity, or a refusal to give the figure a readable face. The same thing happens with visible structure. Wire armature is ordinary to a sculptor. It's how the form is held together while the figure is being built. But once the surrounding putty starts to suggest a torso, a shoulder, a leg, that exposed wire begins to do more visual work. It can make the figure feel constructed, repaired, artificial even, or still partly in progress. Hands make this especially clear. A canteen or backpack can sit beside a figure and still read as equipment. A loose hand usually does something else. Even before it's attached, the shape carries gesture with it. Incomplete bodies can be powerful in miniature art because a missing face, separate hand, visible armature, or unfinished limb is read through the figure first, not as a neutral technique choice. That changes how the viewer understands the piece. There is one part of this subject that keeps it from becoming too dark. An unfinished figure may unsettle us because the human form is still visibly unresolved. But finishing a figure is usually a careful process of making those unresolved parts work together. We attach the hand, paint the eyes, adjust the skin tones, and make the head feel as if it belongs to the rest of the figure. We hide the pins, fill in the gaps, refine the surfaces, and help the figure become coherent enough that the viewer no longer sees the construction first. That transformation is one of the great satisfactions of figure painting. A figure does not come together all at once. First, it's a casting, a print, or a sculpt. Then it's cleaned, pinned, primed, and blocked in. For a while, it may look worse than you hoped. Then, if you stay with it, the painting starts to pull together. The face starts to make sense. The skin tones stop looking patched together. The figure is still paint and material, but it becomes readable as a person. With a figure, some unfinished areas carry more weight than others. A rough sleeve may still read as a painting problem. A blank face, an unfinished eye, flat skin, or visible armature affects the part of the figure we're already trying to understand as human. That is why those areas can be harder to ignore than the same amount of unfinished work somewhere else. For makers, I think the practical side is simple. If your figure looks terrible halfway through, it's probably not ruined. It may simply be at the point where the figure is starting to read as a human before the paint has enough layers and corrections to support it. Keep going. Give yourself time to get the eyes working with the expression, build up the skin tones, and make the separate parts feel connected to the pose. There's an artistic side too. If you leave a figure incomplete, fragmented, blank, or partially assembled, viewers may not read it as simple incompletion. It can change how the figure is understood. We begin with something inert, like plastic, resin, or putty. We cut, pin, sand, prime, paint, and assemble. We pass through the ugly stage where the face looks wrong, the skin tones fight us, and the figure seems worse than it did in primer. Then, if we stay with it long enough, something changes. The eyes begin to work with the expression. The skin tones stop looking patched together. The figure is still only paint and material, but it becomes readable as a person. Maybe that is why the unfinished stage is worth noticing. It shows how much has to come together before all those separate parts begin to hold together as a human form. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a fellow hobbyist, subscribe, follow, or simply take a little time to listen when you can. I appreciate every person who joins me here, and I'll be right here with my lamp on, brush in hand, story waiting. Before I sign off today, I want to thank the Shepherd Payne Education Fund for their support of this podcast and their commitment to education in the miniature arts. Until next time, keep your hands steady, see clearly, not obediently, and keep your story your own. Thanks for listening.